Good evening, everyone, and welcome once again to Liberty.me Live. I'm your host, Mike Reed, and tonight our guests are Dr. Norman Horn, and Doug Stuart of LibertarianChristians.com. Let's talk about Dr. Horn first. Norman has won numerous awards for his writings, his research in both engineering and theology. He's a double threat, and he's the author of multiple peer-reviewed publications in science, economics, and political theory, and currently he's working at a top-secret project at MIT. And then there's Doug Stuart. Doug holds a Master's of Divinity. He's a life group leader and a deacon at an evangelical church in Pennsylvania, and his work focuses on evangelism, faith and economics, and the importance of nonviolence. And I learned just before the show that his license plate says Bastiat.
Which is really cool. I don't have anything that cool on my license plate.
I bet you nobody in Massachusetts has that, so you can go grab that.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I literally just applied for plates, so we're about to, so it's gonna happen.
Good. So this is Christians in Liberty. This is the show, and when we started thinking about doing a show like this, the organization that I would talk about you guys be belonging to was LibertarianChristians.com. But now that's like evolved into a new version of itself, right? The Libertarian Christian Institute. Norm, can you tell us a bit about why this transformation out of just a website into something more solid?
Yeah, absolutely. So LibertarianChristians.com evolved from an idea that I had really almost 10 years ago, to where what I was seeing at the time was that there was just not a real good explanation of why Christianity and libertarianism really do complement each other really well as a general ethical personal philosophy and then a political philosophy. And so the website developed to address that particular convergence of ideas. And so over time, with people like Doug coming on board and becoming contributors, and people like Lawrence Vance being involved, and all sorts of people getting involved and being more interested in such a thing, it became very clear that we had an opportunity to do something more. And so what we wanted to do was to kind of create a new organization that was dedicated to explaining the consistency of libertarianism and Christian theology. So we formed the Libertarian Christian Institute precisely for this reason, to have an organization that people can rally around and to come together and discuss these ideas in a more consistent manner, to have, in a sense, a new version of a think tank, but also something that is akin to something like Students for Liberty or Young Americans for Liberty, that's oriented towards organizing people around groups that can help promote these ideas in a similar way. And so our organizational goals are to do this very thing, to hold conferences, to hold small group studies, to produce materials for people to bring to their churches and to their communities that will help people to explain why Christianity and liberty are so important to each other.
So, Norm, you guys actually recently had a conference, like right kind of at the moment you were announcing the Institute. But that was just a couple of months ago. Can you tell us briefly what the conference was and whether we're getting another one next year?
Yeah, so in August we hosted our second Christians for Liberty conference. We hosted one previously in 2014. It was very successful. And so this was kind of the follow-up. What we were kind of trying to do is to you might say, play test the idea, to see if we really could put something together like this and see people respond. Would people come out to it? And we think that we've got a pretty good solid basis now for establishing a new organization based on these ideas. And so we are intending to hold a third. We do not have a date set yet, but we can tell you that we're going to do our best to try and hold that in either late summer or early fall next year. And we're going to try and be doing some more events as well in 2016 in addition, if we can. And that's going to depend a lot upon our viewers here even tonight. What we're trying to do right now is target people who are interested in donating to this type of effort, who really see the need to build a new coalition of people who care about Christian faith and who care about libertarian ideas, and to bring that forward in a new way. We're trying to do something very different than what's currently out there. We don't want to, in any way disparage what other people are doing and other groups are doing, but we see what we're doing as something slightly different. We want to very distinctly promote a hardcore libertarian ideal in a venue that has not necessarily been served real well, that being the church at large. We're not trying to discourage people from interacting with their own churches. We want people instead to re-engage and get more engaged with their churches in this regard, to get more involved in talking to their fellow Christians, their fellow friends, their the people they interact with on a daily and a weekly basis with liberty values.
Right, right. So I want to get back to this conference point because there were a whole bunch of talks at the conference, and I think coming out of them, there's actually the start of a 3-part series by you, Doug, that's on libertarianchristians.com right now. Am I right? Does that new series, Things That Make for Peace, come out of the conference?
Yes, it did. It was my talk in the morning, and I had a subtitle, Who Are We as Christians and Libertarians? What does it mean to put those two words together a little bit? Things that make for peace. Peace has been sort of a big theme in my life in the last few years, understanding, a theology of peace and the mission of Jesus. And so what's up on the website right now is basically an adapted version of what was said, or in addition to some of the things I never had time to say because we ran out of time at the conference, there's some additional things in there as well, and probably a little more elaborate because you know what happens when you get up and speak and you write and that kind of thing.
Right. You wanna focus it in. So can you tell us, kind of in a nutshell, what you're saying here? Who are you guys as Christians and libertarians?
Yeah, well, I think the connection for me, as I sort of alluded to, was peace, and libertarians value peace. You have Larry Reed's book, Anything Peaceful, and I just kept thinking, man, this is just sort of in a way, a litmus test or the guiding principle. If it's something that harms somebody else or is violent, then you're not allowed to do it. Christians go maybe a little bit further, and the idea of shalom, borrowing from the Jewish scriptures, that it's more than just what you're not allowed to do, what you're the prohibitions of harming another individual. It goes a little bit further to that. So they both value peace, and they're kind of connected in that way. But Christians push it a little bit further and say, you know what, we can also be for a society where there's wholeness and integration of people and community, where people actually love one another, where there's reconciliation between those who are otherwise at odds with one another. There's images in Scripture, the lion lays down with the lamb, and there's some things like that. And as a people of faith, Christians, those who follow Jesus, I should just say it that way, Jesus taught them to pray, God's will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And in a way that is sort of forward-looking. Christians are known for people who look forward to heaven. Well, that's good, but there's that sense in which heaven's supposed to come here too, in a way that says, okay, well, this is what heaven's going to be peaceful, right? I mean, no one sort of can't imagine that. Even if you don't believe in heaven, you imagine heaven is.
That's how you know it's heaven and not Valhalla. There's no.
Right. So it's it's sort of like that. So what does that look like in the realm of politics? And you see consistently in Scripture, you see God moving God's people away from empire. You see God releasing those who are captive and in bondage to others who enslave them. You see Jesus completely utilizing and sort of upending the political language of the day, such as Jesus is Lord was a very political statement in response to the Romans that says, nope, Caesar is not Lord. So the gospel is very political in its own context, and it basically is a movement away from empire. And I would say if there's a prophet or many prophets, or maybe I should say a prophetic movement today in the United States at least, and throughout the world in my minimal experience of knowing what's out there, is the libertarians. They're the ones that are saying, yo, you guys are like all power hungry. Can we rethink this a little bit? Or a lot, actually. At this point, it's not rethinking a little bit.
You could get your foot in the door with, let's rethink a little bit. Taxation of it.
I'm fine with a little bit, but it's way more necessary than just a little bit.
Yeah.
So speaking truth to power against empire leads toward peace. At least that's what it should do.
Right. So, Norm, we've been seeing a lot recently on following presidential campaigns on the Republican side at least of the the employment of Christian rhetoric, or the rhetoric of Jesus, to serve existing political ends. So famously, Donald Trump has recently claimed that his favorite book is the Bible. In fact, I was trying to fact check that claim just before the show, and I found this glowing review on what I think would be Charisma News, but you informed me is really the Greek Charisma News, where it says it's this kind of biblical daily news website, and it says, Donald Trump has kept audiences around the country hanging on his every word, but he's revealed today that he depends on the word, capitals. So it seems like people are swallowing this quick line from Trump right away. Can you explain what's going on here, what's wrong with that, but why it's successful?
Well, they have a clever headline editor. Sorry to step up there, Norm.
They certainly did. That seems pretty certain. But I would first of all say that the claims of the website seem highly doubtful. I'd also secondly claim that probably they don't necessarily know how to pronounce charisma either. But that's just characteristic. What I would say is probably at issue here is that this is just one more instance of a politician playing to what he believes to be the base of his voters for political gain. And it is not uncommon to see this, whether you're talking about pretty much any American president from beginning to end at this point. Whether you're talking about, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, or James Madison, for that matter. I mean, maybe they were more sincere back then, but they still had a lot of mistaken values and mistaken ways of thinking about things. Nonetheless, you can also find Donald Trump saying that you can fact check this quote too, that he doesn't believe that he's ever needed to ask God forgiveness for anything. So I don't necessarily believe Donald Trump when it comes to his elucidation of Christian theology by any means. If he says the Bible is his favorite book, well, maybe he really does just look at it as a little book of stories or something like that. But to claim that he both believes it is his favorite book and actually understands it, he hasn't wrestled with the book. I'll tell you what, the Bible is not my favorite book because it is too doggone hard. Okay? It is a lot easier for me to go read Robert Heinlein or even Mises or Rothbard sometimes. The Bible is hard to understand, and it takes some time. It oftentimes more than it takes me to understand somebody like of Rothbard or reading, a frickin' science textbook. I have to wrestle with it. So if somebody just tells me, well, gee, the Bible's my favorite book, and I just read it every day, and I feel really good when I get done with it, I don't believe that. That smacks of insincerity to me. The people who I respect are those who say, oh, man, I read the Bible today and it really ripped me up, and it didn't make me feel good about myself. I'm realizing that there's something about me that needs to change, and that's what you need to respect about people who really care about Christian faith, Christian theology, really living out the Word of God. And I know Doug will attest to this too, that this is not a willy-nilly exercise that we go through in order to raise our own standards of action, to understand the world better, to understand the spiritual side of things better. This is not some sort of just intellectual exercise. This is something we wrestle with very deeply. And it's something we have to deal with when it comes to our politics as well. And if you don't see that coming through in Scripture, then you're making a mistake. You're missing something.
Yeah. So, Doug, you've done a lot of work, like in your church, leading classes, leading life groups, and do you see this kind of Trumpish, shallow approach burbling up? Like, is this you have to struggle against again and again?
Not in my church, thankfully. It could be that I just haven't paid attention too much. But.
This is your chance to say that because your church is awesome. You're throwing it away.
Well, there are many people in my church that I know that I love, and I don't think they're impressed with what's going on. I think the allure is it's typically the fact that he doesn't back down from the media, and he's definitely entertaining to watch, which you know, I mean, if you're a conservative person who would typically vote somewhere in a, you know, or just historically votes Republican, you're looking for someone who's going to entertain you a little bit more. And you know, he's entertaining. I mean, there's no doubt about that. I mean, but yeah, the whole sincerity thing, I mean, I don't know anybody who believes he's sincere. I think they like the fact, I mean, it's similar to Chris Christie. He just tells you like it is, and you know, you like that sort of stand up and just, I'm not going to take no, you know, I'm not going to take it from people kind of attitude, which, yeah, that's fine, I guess. You know, a lot of people do think of, you know, the next president, he's going to be our commander-in-chief, and that word commander, you know, I think that plays to that sort of persona that Christians want to see, whether they should or not, is you know, another story, but they want to see, oh, someone who's acting like a commander-in-chief, and that's kind of their persona. And if they don't, and if someone is sort of exudes that in a debate and doesn't take flack from anybody, including the moderators, they're just going to be attracted to it, even if they're, you know, later never going to really vote for him.
And another thing we should kind of note too is that, of course, in the GOP especially, they really do play to the kind of conservative, theologically Christian voter. This is something that's, I mean, it's just historically evident. Whether you're looking at George W. Bush, George H.W. Bush, Ronald Reagan, or before, you know, every time they're appealing to that kind of person. Ever since pretty much the rise of what you might call the religious right, in so many respects, that's what we're looking at. And so, you know, you see, you can't be some sort of ethical atheist and be in the GOP and expect to get a presidential nomination. You are at the very least going to have to play the line. You know, it's just not
show up at church, photo ops.
Yeah. No, I mean, regardless of what you think about it, it would be easier to be a gay Christian trying to be a presidential candidate than an atheist trying to get a presidential candidate nomination from the GOP.
Wow, that's a pretty bold statement.
I guarantee it.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, regardless of how you think about the morality of the situation, I believe that would be the case. You will not get the nomination otherwise. But that's just observations from my point of view, and I'm not, you know.
Okay. So I want to go to the other quasi-Christian controversy du jour, which is about Kim Davis, who is the civil servant who handed it to me on a silver platter. The lady who was in charge of handing out marriage licenses at some county clerk's office, totally unknown to the world. And at the time that the Supreme Court decision on gay marriage came in, this is my gay segue to the gay Christian getting elected. She declared that she would no longer do licenses. It was against her religion. Now, of course, I'm of the view that anytime you're a civil servant of any kind, and you believe that God tells you don't do something, you shouldn't do it, for sure. I'm great with that. But can you talk about what she ought to do, or how this has all been portrayed?
Doug, what do you think?
My first thought when I heard that she was in prison was, Jesus told you this would happen. Why are you getting Mike Huckabee to bail you out? Like, have you read the book of Acts, where they stand up against the government and they're thrown in prison? And there was no other sort of experience that the early church knew. And so if she's going to be faithful to her beliefs that God told her this, or that it's just her sincerely held convictions, you know, I grew up in pretty conservative groups, and we were told that, you know what, you're going to maybe have to do this someday, is stand up for your convictions, and you might have to go to prison for it. Like that, we just kind of understood that that's what would happen. And to make a sort of I want to say political statement or stunt out of it, just sort of, it's kind of like, well, really, where's your commitment? Are you just standing up because you have some sort of need to do that? Is it really a sincere? I can't question her sincerity at all in that regard. I don't want to do that. But I don't know. That was my first response was, you know, your Lord told you this would happen. You know, to make it an issue that it shouldn't it's kind of interesting.
And to say, and then to ask, like, well, what should she have done at that point? And I've kind of gone on record, at least if Facebook is a record, at least, of saying, like, well, look, if this is what you expected to happen, you know, if this is what you felt like this was an issue that you needed to deal with, maybe this is your clarion call to just get out. You know, if you don't feel comfortable in just dealing with the law that way, then maybe it's time to leave. Maybe it's time to get out of the situation. Like, again, you know, it's hard to kind of question the sincerity in this particular case, but it's kind of, you know, I think Andrew Napolitano wrote a pretty interesting article kind of suggesting that she really wasn't going with what the letter of the law said. Now, maybe she was trying to go for something beyond the letter of the law. She's addressing some sort of spirit of things that you know, that she felt was more important in that case. But in that case, why are you trying to deal with the letter of the law with just this sort of spirit side that when you have the option, just leave? And to me, if this was really the issue that was the make or break, I'm going to draw a line in the sand right here, this far and no farther, then maybe it's time to get out. And I think that's something that, you know, other people had to deal with that too. You know, we've seen military men and women who have dealt with the issue of whether or not they were going to go kill somebody, and they said, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to be a conscientious objector. Right. And you know what they do? They leave. They resign, and they don't care whether or not it affects their pension. They don't care whether or not it's going to come with an honorable or dishonorable discharge. They get out. And you know what? She didn't have to even worry about that. She just had to resign. So yeah. I kind of feel like that it was kind of stuntish in a way, and it didn't. Like this was an issue that almost didn't need to be made. You should expect to be persecuted if you are going to stand up for the name of Christ, and to kind of call on people to defend her in the political realm like this. It's a bit dicey.
Well, and then it calls for, like, what I mean. This is a very liberal use of the word persecution, but now all the rest of us who don't act like she does typically are persecuted in reputation. I'm stretching the use there, but you get what I mean. It's like, really, this is embarrassing. Yeah. Like, can you think a little bit more about the body of Christ that you want to be a part of? And you know what? Everyone makes mistakes, and the whole. I'm not going to question her sincerity on that end, but hopefully this kind of thing, she'll realize what happens and be like, oh well, that was a little short-sighted, or maybe a little bit on the selfish side.
Well, and to be fair, we've also in the church we have not always dealt with issues of sexuality very well. I think we just need to accept that. And whether or not we come to the conclusion that we are morally on the right ground, whether we're going to accept the more conservative theological position on the topic of homosexuality or not, we need to accept the fact that we weren't treating people well in the past. But that doesn't mean that we need to go off and do this. Maybe we need to reevaluate the way that we interact with the world around us in a different way. And I think that's what the bigger lesson is of all of this, of the whole situation that we've been in with regards to gay marriage, with regards to Kim Davis, whether it's been presidential candidates, and all of these things that we've had to encounter in the last couple of years, is maybe we're interacting with the political realm wrong, church. Maybe we need to reevaluate our positions on these things and think about, what is our proper engagement with the world in this regard. And I think that comes, that comes through, kind of, let's go full circle on this. This comes through in what we've been trying to put forward in LibertarianChristians.com. If you search for, terms like gay marriage or homosexual ethics or whatnot, in LibertarianChristians.com, you'll find things that I've written, that Doug's written, I think, and a debate that we did publicly a couple of years ago to this effect. And we come down on the theologically conservative position, but we also fully recognize that the way that we've necessarily treated people hasn't been good all the time, and we hopefully can encourage the church to repent of that and to come about in a different direction in how we engage with people.
Right. We have a guide on liberty.me by Graham Brooks from the UK. It's called Defend Liberty in the Church. Dear fans, I'll just drop that in the chat box for you. And,
do it. Great book.
So yeah, I love it, and I understand Norman was involved in putting that one together or drafting it. And so Graham Brooks, the author, recently had a stateless marriage in the United Kingdom because in his vision, I mean, he's having a heterosexual marriage, but in his vision, the spiritual and social events of the marriage that unites two people should be separate from the legal recognition or legal sanction of it. And it seems like that's a very different approach than the Kim Davis approach to the question of gay marriage, whereas the Kim Davis approach seems to say that some form of Christian ethics ought to be encoded and enforced via the law. The Graham Brooks solution is to say that those two things ought to be separate. We should take a step back.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, that's the difference fundamentally of what the Kim Davis position is and the Mike Huckabee position is versus what the Libertarian Christian position is. Fundamentally, is that we have a view that suggests that there is a view of marriage that is within the church, and then everything else that's outside of that is not within the purview of the church. Sorry, So those definitions, like we don't have. I have neither the right nor obligation to go out and force that definition on people. If you're going to be within the church, though, then we need to deal within the church that way.
Right. Right. Well, guys, Doug, Norman, this has been really fascinating. I look forward to us doing it again. But I know Norman's got a new baby coming along soon. So there's a great force moving into Norman's life, disrupting his sleep patterns and hopefully bringing him great tribulation to which he can contemplate the importance of his fatherhood. Yeah. So I'm going to wrap up, and as I do that, what I'm going to do is give people three links, just two links to other things coming up tomorrow night and the night after on Liberty.me Live, and then I'm going to give them some links to LibertarianChristians.com, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Doug for the final word. So
let me throw out this real quick that Doug's way ahead of me in this regard. He's got like 3 kids, or well, I don't know. I mean, he's having.
Yes, and audience, I don't know if you can see it, but if you look behind Doug, if you have a kind of a wide view, if you look behind Doug, there's actually a whole bunch. There we go. There's his kids' art behind him.
And my books.
And his books.
Some of them. I do read my level books, not just my kids.
Not just Clifford the Big Red Dog.
Oh, yes, Clifford.
Yeah, there you go.
Smashing Property.
Okay, folks. So the show that's coming up tomorrow night at 8 o'clock Eastern is Unbiased America, for sure our most regular and perhaps most entertaining show. It's this week's guests are Carl Gibson of US Uncut and Omar Rivero of Occupy Democrats. So this is going to be a really fun kind of a fireworks show where the libertarian, conservative, Unbiased America guys go head-to-head with some of their greatest socialist Democrat rivals. Really looking forward to that one. And then on Thursday night, also at 8 o'clock Eastern, we've got The Future of Freedom, which is hosted by Scott Horton, where he interviews Jacob Hornberger of the Future of Freedom Foundation. I'm really looking forward to that one, too. Future of Freedom Foundation has a new book out, The Monetary Central Planning and the State by Richard Ebeling, and so I suspect they're going to be talking about that one in particular. It's hit #2 on the Amazon charts over the weekend. So I'm looking forward to that one too. So now, dear audience, if you want to get more Norman Horn and more Doug Stuart, head on over to LibertarianChristians.com. That's the original website, and it remains the website for the Libertarian Christian Institute. So that's the place to go to get all of their great stuff, including that 3-part series that Doug Stuart presented coming out of their conference. I'll actually give a separate link to that 3-part series. There you go. Okay, folks, thank you so much for joining me. Now I'm going to turn it back over to Doug for the final word.
Yeah, we're Libertarian Christian Institute is a fast-growing group, and we want to get the church engaged with society in how our faith actually affects how we think about politics. Our commitment is to the Prince of Peace, and how does that affect what it means to do things like vote and all the things that we think of as political. We're getting people engaged and thinking about that.
Amen.
Fantastic. That's great. All right. Thank you, Norman and Doug. Thank you, audience. Everybody have a lovely night, and I'll see you again soon on Liberty.me Live. Good evening, everyone, and welcome once again to Liberty.me Live. I'm your host, Mike Reed, and tonight Our guests are Dr. Norman Horn, and Doug Stuart of LibertarianChristians.com. Let's talk about Dr. Horn first. Norman has won numerous awards for his writings, his research in both engineering and theology. He's a double threat, and he's the author of multiple peer-reviewed publications in science, economics, and political theory, and currently he's working at a top-secret project at MIT. And then there's Doug Stuart. Doug holds a Master's of Divinity. He's a life group leader and a deacon at an evangelical church in Pennsylvania, and his work focuses on evangelism, faith and economics, and the importance of nonviolence. And I learned just before the show that his license plate says, like right kind of at the moment you were announcing the Institute, but that was just a couple of months ago. Can you tell us briefly what the conference was and whether we're getting another one next year?
Yeah, so in August we hosted our second Christians for Liberty conference. We hosted one previously in 2014. It was very successful. And so this was kind of the follow-up. What we were kind of trying to do is to you might say, play test the idea, to see if we really could put something together like this and see people respond. Would people come out to it? And we think that we've got a pretty good solid basis now for establishing a new organization based on these ideas. And so we are intending to hold a third. We do not have a date set yet, but we can tell you that we're going to an idea that I had really almost 10 years ago, to where what I was seeing at the time was that there was just not a real good explanation of why Christianity and libertarianism really do complement each other really well as a general ethical personal philosophy and then a political philosophy. And so the website developed to address that particular convergence of ideas. And so over time, with people like Doug coming on board and becoming contributors, and people like Lawrence Vance being involved, and all sorts of people getting involved and being more interested in such a thing, it became very clear that we had an opportunity to do something more. And so what we wanted to do was to kind of create a new organization that was dedicated to explaining the consistency of libertarianism and Christian theology. So we formed the Libertarian Christian Institute precisely for this reason, to have an organization that people can rally around and to come together and discuss these ideas in a more consistent manner, to have, in a sense, a new version of a think tank, but also something that is akin to something like Students for Liberty or Young Americans for Liberty, that's oriented towards organizing people around groups that can help promote these ideas in a similar way. And so our organizational goals are to do this very thing, to hold conferences, to hold small group studies, to produce materials for people to bring to their churches and to their communities that will help people to explain why Christianity and liberty are so important to each other.
So, Norman, you guys actually recently had a conference last year.
Which is really cool. I don't have anything that cool on my license plate.
I bet you nobody in Massachusetts has that, so you can go grab that.
Yeah,
that's pretty cool. I literally just applied for plates, or we're about to, so it's gonna happen.
Good. So this is Christians in Liberty. This is the show, and when we started thinking about doing a show like this, the organization that I would talk about you guys be belonging to was LibertarianChristians.com. But now that's like evolved into a new version of itself, right? The Libertarian Christian Institute. Norm, can you tell us a bit about why this transformation out of just a website into something more solid?
Yeah, absolutely. So LibertarianChristians.com evolved